Hey there, good morning. Well, today I am back with you, and so about a week ago I decided to just kind of act in some obedience, which is always good. And one of the things God was asking me to do was start sharing more. And it seems like what He does is sometimes He preaches to me, and then a lot of times that preaching is for me, and it's not for me to give or um, ask anybody else to hear, because it's just something that He needs me to work on at the time, and maybe in that moment. But then there are other times where He speaks to me and it feels like that message is not just for me, it is for so many to hear. And so this is just a way that I decided to um, um, a platform that I decided to use in order to tell you those things and share those things with you. I think that a lot of times God speaks to us, and we don't know that it's Him speaking, and He's trying to speak life into us. And every time God gives you a blessing, it's not for you only. It's for those around you and those that may come in contact with you. And as we get closer to God, and as I've gotten closer to God, I see that He uses a light that He's instilled in me to attract to others, and I think that's amazing. It's nothing of mine. It's nothing that I can do to gain that. Is all His grace, but He wants to use you in that same way. And today I want to get on here and give you my life story, and it's my God story, and I call it my life story because everything that I'm going to share with you today is going to be basically how my life has come to be my God story. And God is now my life. God is now the controller and the one who is holding the reins and the steering wheel of in every decision that I make. And I want to share that with you and how I got to that point, because there are so many people that knew me before, and I just wanted to share that with you because the person I was before wasn't somebody who would get on here and speak not a single word to anybody who would help anybody, much less speak in a way that would help somebody come to a closer relationship with God or Jesus. And so that is testimony in itself, and I want to share that with you. I'm not sure. I haven't written anything down. I just want to tell you how I came to be with the Lord and to have a life that is of purpose and fulfillment, and to be able to be in a place where there's still a lot of chaos around me. There was still a lot of hurt and still a lot of disruption and abnormality around me, but yet I can have peace in it. And these are the same things that I was dealing with before I came to Jesus, that I'm dealing with now, but there is a peace in them. And so how does one person transform their atmosphere into a place of chaos and doubt and destruction and drug use and alcohol abuse and all of the things that I was addicted to? How does one person use that story to show that there can be peace at the end of it? And so today I just want to start with this. I want to start with the fact that I have no idea how I'm here right now, except for that God spoke to me many times. But there was one particular time where He spoke to me in a place in my life where I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror and speak a word to myself, because I was so ashamed and so broken in who I was, and I couldn't look at who I was and be proud. But my story starts basically when I was little, and I remember one thing I remember is a lot of loneliness. And my mom was always she was a very good mom and dad, because she had to be. She had to be, because I grew up in alcoholism with my father, who For many years, I didn't really know who he was and didn't know a lot about him because I remember being in kindergarten, first, second grade, and those are the key beginning memories that I have of my dad. And he was an alcoholic. He spent his time. He was a hard worker, just a beast of a hard worker, and he was a mason. So I mean, he was just like, he was a tough dad, and he just an amazing boss. Amazing. He had his own business. He built walls and room extensions and just dug holes, unbelievable holes that were just like not made for man to do it by their own hands, but he did it. And he was an awesome hard worker. But one thing that he was troubled by was an alcohol addiction that he had. And how did that play in my life? Well, my memories of him were um, me getting up, and my dad was always already at work by 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. So I woke up and he wasn't there, and he would work all day, but then he would go straight to a local bar, which he spent probably close to 20 years in his entirety. And that wasn't the whole time that I was, growing up with him, but I'm one of five, and the second from the youngest. I have a one littler sister, and but I remember that I would wake up and he wasn't there, and then I would come home from school and he wasn't there, and he wouldn't get home till about 9, 10 o'clock, but we'd already be in bed usually. So Monday through Friday, that was my understanding of dad was um, working all day, and then he was at the bar at night. And so I would see him sometimes on Sundays, but mostly our day was Saturday to spend with him. And I remember those Saturdays were just they were very seldom. I just like anything, the more you do something, the more you experience something, that is who you um, become. And so uh, I remember him not being in my life more than I do remember him being in my life. That's hard to say, but God has done a work in me where I have been able to forgive him for that. But at the time, that wasn't the case. At the time, it was just a presence that wasn't there. So my mom was a very strong presence in my life. We grew up Catholic. We grew up in a Catholic atmosphere. Sahuarita was maybe 5,000 people at the most, and don't quote me on that because it could have been way less than that. We had one church in Sahuarita, and we had one church in Green Valley, and I remember being an altar boy in church, and I was probably 7 or 8, and I remember going through sacraments and things throughout the church that the church would instill in you, the Catholic Church, and I have to say that I'm very grateful to that because I at least had some exposure to God. I had at least some type of introduction to who he was in my life. And a memory that I shared a lot is that when I was an altar boy, and we would be on the stage, and the father would look over to you, or the deacon, I think it was, when it was time to take to bless the bread and wine, the body and blood of Christ. He would look at me, and that's when I would grab my bells and I would shake them, and they would ring, and that would be the blessing of the body and blood of Christ. And then the congregation would come up and accept it. But I remember doing it for a reason, because he looked at me and it was time for me to do that thing. And so it wasn't something that was instilled in me to do it as memory, and knowing what Jesus had done and why he had done it, and what the blood and his body broken for me meant. But I still had that atmosphere to grow up in. So I'm very grateful for that. But as I grew up, there was very little. Let me say this: there was not an "I love you" from a parent until I think was 23. So with that being said, I always knew that my mom loved me. I always knew that she had a desire for so much for us, and I knew that she had a desire to watch us grow up and be um, great people, just like any parent does. Any parent has aspirations for their children in that way, and so I always knew that she loved me and she wanted so much for me, and that she would do anything for me. And growing up, I was a pitcher, and so she was my catcher. She was my practice catcher in the front of the house, and this is my mom. And um and uh growing up, I remember these little things that she did that typically our father would, do for us. And I would see this from a distance. And so I would see that other fathers would do these things, and other fathers would take them to their practices and things like that. But that was my mom for me, because I didn't have that presence when I was young growing up. And so I'm just very grateful to my mom for that. And I know that she loved me the best that she could, but she was trying to play two roles. And so um, I'm just very thankful for her in the effort that she put into 5 children and doing that same thing for all of us. Um, but at the same time, there was something missing. And as I grew up, and I didn't have the skills to be able to be I guess a son that had been taught by his father, I had to rely on other people's understanding of what a man should look like and be like. And I wasn't attracted to very many good examples of that. And so I left my house when I was about 19. Started drink. Actually, well, let's take a step back there. I started drinking when I was probably 16, I think. Started going across the line to Mexico, because Mexico is about 45 minutes away from here. Would have my brother's ID, who's 5 years older than me, and I would go get into a bar at 16, 17, start getting into some really bad ways. And yeah, alcohol leads to other stuff. There was some drug use there as well at an early age. Tried a lot of things, never was addicted too hard to any drugs, but alcohol was always my choice, the thing that I went to. It numbed a lot of garbage that was bothering me constantly, and we'll get into that. But that's where my alcohol use started. And as I continued on in that, alcohol was always something that was part of every part of me. So as I got into a relationship, alcohol followed me into that. As I got into jobs and career moves, alcohol was always part of my life. Another thing that was a part of who I was me being very selfish and not thinking anything of others and the well-being of anybody around me. I feel like I didn't gain that until way later in my life when God came in. So I was not somebody who you would go to for a favor. I was very condescending. I was basically the biggest jerk you would ever meet in your life if you weren't in my circle of friends, which is a very small circle, because most people didn't want to be around me. I was a jerk. I was the bully. I was somebody who you probably would not trust or should not trust with a friendship, or somebody that you could go to and say, that's just a good person. I was not that. And so as I continued in life, that, and attached to alcohol, and attached to just not having a stable, loving, or it wasn't a loving growing up situation, where I would think that I didn't feel like I wasn't loved, but there's something about affection and hugging and being told that you're loved, that just does something, because it's something that we are all looking for. And it's something that I went out in the world and looked for, because I couldn't find it at home, or I just wasn't able to. My mom wasn't able to be that strong for us and still tell us that she loved us. And I know that's something that she grew up in, that, and she was she was the youngest of 14, so she was at the bottom of that trail of ducklings as well. So I know that had some stuff to do with her. That is her story. But as I continued in life, I moved out of my mom's house, my dad's house, and I moved on into just different atmospheres of drug and sometimes alcohol use. I'm sorry, some alcohol, but sometimes drug use, and that was always something, like I said, that followed me everywhere I go and everywhere I went. And so, as a young adult, as 21, 22-year old young adult, um, I had a decent job. I was making decent money. I just wasn't using it well, and I got into a relationship, a long-term relationship, where um, my girlfriend of like probably 5 years, she cheated on me, and then of a relationship probably 5 years later after that, same thing. And so I was dealing with a lot of rejection, um, even from growing up, feeling rejected by my dad, who had chosen a substance over me, who had chosen to live a different lifestyle and come home to something that that I wanted along with him, maybe, but he was addicted to it. So he was buried in a disease, and I had a lot of anger for him in that. And so, in that rejection and the rejection in relationships in my life, and these were long-term relationships. Obviously my relationship with my dad was long-term, and I had two 5-year relationships with two other women before I met my wife that were both major fails because I had invested so much of myself into it. And for it to come to a point where um, I didn't feel like it was their fault, it was all my fault, because I didn't know how to love them, because I never understood what real love was. So I carried all that burden for me. And so as I continued on, I met Selena. We were not married. She had a beautiful little boy named Aiden. He was 18 months when I met them, and things were awesome. And I finally felt like I had met somebody who was going to be the one, but I had already felt that before, right? So I was very weary to allow myself fully to and give myself all the way to her, and reveal all the deepest, darkest things about me. And there was always just some reservation, basically. So that always played a part in our rough times, and that I would not allow her to fully come in, because it was just like me waiting for her to do the same thing that everyone else that I had carried so much credit and weight in. I had allowed them to hurt me in that. And so I was afraid of rejection. And so as we continued on, Selena and I, we actually had a Richard, and we got a house, and things were, it seemed like they were getting, starting to flow in my life as a still 25-year-old, 26-year-old, and things were still coming along, but there was still these things that I was attached to. And there was even there was a long portion in my life where I felt like I was not worthy of having good things, because every time that I thought was a good thing, it would leave me, and every time that I considered something to be good, it ended up being the thing that broke me. And so my understanding of good was to just enjoy it for a little time, and then get away from it before it hurt me. And so that's what I did. I pushed Selena away quite a few times, and she was going through her own process. So we were basically wanting to come together, but we couldn't, because we were just kind of like this effect that continuously happened over. And that's the best way I can explain that. Her story's her story. So on my part, I wanted to love her so bad, and I wanted to give her all of my love and accept all of her love, but I couldn't, because I didn't understand what love really meant. And I didn't have an example of it that was true and faithful. So I couldn't accept it, and I couldn't give it. And so it was very hard. It was constant clash of wanting and not being able to have. the best thing that I felt was for me, and that was her. And so we continued. We had more children, but we did things outside of the way God had intended. And so we were not married, and we had more children, and we continued to have alcohol between our family. In our family dynamic, alcohol was always something that was part of us. In our friend relationships, they were very strong. We were always the house where we always threw parties, and we provided all of this way of living for other people, and it was just who we were. And through that process, as alcohol and drug use and other addictions became part of who we were, the things that were important to us no longer became important to us. Our children were not of the highest importance to us. Our relationship between Selena and I was not of the utmost importance. Our families, our extended families, were not of the utmost importance. And if you think about it, those are the things that make us and basically tell us that we are loved and show us love. Those people around us, we chose to live a party life, and we chose to live a life that was rough, and so it played its toll, and eventually we were just a mess. We financially got in trouble. We lost our house, and in the midst of that, we were losing our kids. We weren't. I wasn't parenting. I wasn't being a leader. I wasn't of any leader at all in my home. If anything, I led them astray, and I was feeling the weight of that, and to the point where our children weren't even allowed to be in our home on Mother's Day of 2014. They were on that weekend before, they were taken from our home, and even the state decided that we weren't a home that was safe enough to have our kids. And this right here was a turning point for me, where it was like, okay, I have chosen so many things. I've chosen so many other things above love. So much so that now the thing that I love the most, again, I can't have access to it. I can't be around my children right now because of the decisions that I've made. Because of the things that I chose to be important to me. Because I loved to party, and I loved to be popular, and I loved to be a person that God did not make me to be. I loved it more than the things that were in my life that truly exemplified love. And it was to the fact that I didn't understand love. I didn't understand what it meant to be loved, and I didn't know how to love. And that does not excuse any of my decisions, but what it does is it brings light to the fact that I was searching for something that I could not find. And so from that point, Selena and I literally, all we had was to revert back to what we knew. And in the Catholic culture, you would light candles, and you would speak to saints, and you would ask a certain saint for a certain thing. And so I don't remember what candle we lit, but we even went to our mission, the Sanavir mission. We lit candles, and we asked, I'm not sure who we prayed to, but we asked for forgiveness, and we asked for our children to be back in our home, and we asked for a new life. We asked for all these things, and it still didn't happen. So we were down to the bottom. We were down to the bottom of what we had, and there wasn't much left. And so we literally Googled, and we Googled churches near me. And the first church, actually one of the churches, I'm not sure what number of church, but the church that we saw was my church. And so we were like, what's there to lose? Let's go. And understand that at this point in my life, there was no smile on my face when I said let's go. It was more like, let's go. I don't care. There's no reason for me to be here in the first place. I don't have my children. We're losing our house. This relationship that I know is supposed to work isn't with Selena. There's no purpose. I'm waking up daily and I'm not sure what for. And the things that are supposed to be the most important to me, I have no access to, truly. So if my mentality was this, is like, if I didn't wake up tomorrow, would it even matter? Would anybody even send a text or say, hey, where are you? I truly didn't know that. I couldn't truly answer that my presence was of any importance in this world. And I considered going up to, I think one time there's this place near us called Box Canyon. And it's got like this steep edge. And there's even a car down there that accidentally fell, I believe. I'm sorry, I'm not sure exactly what that situation is, but I remember like having this envision of, if I drove up there and I just drove off, would anybody even know that I was down there? And would they even care? Like, that's something that I remember. And so that was my mentality. And so I said, well, let's go check it out. And so we went, and there were, So we went to my church at SPS, Rita Primary School. And Pastor Dusty was in the middle of what's called Walking the Roman Road. And he was specifically talking today, and let me set this up for you a little bit. I was in a place where I was so ashamed of myself. I mean, if you're a father, you pride yourself on your children. If you're a father, you pride yourself on the things, without God, you pride yourself on the things that you have accomplished, right? And your home and your relationship and with your wife and again, your children, your family dynamic, those are the things that you pride yourself on. And all of that was being taken away from me. So I wasn't proud of anything I had done. I walked in there completely broken, sat in the back row because there was an exit there. And my mentality walking in was, if I'm going to be challenged, or nobody's going to tell me how to live my life, because that's who I am. And all this just pride was just something that, in the midst of not being able to be proud of anything, I was still pride ridden. Like I still had this high level of pride. Like, those are my decisions. Nobody's going to tell me what to do. Nobody's going to tell me how to live my life. So I sat near an exit so that I could run when I was challenged. And I remember that. I truly remember that. That was my intentional place of sitting, just for that reason. And so anyway, Pastor was going through this. He was going through Romans 12. And he was talking about conformity and the things that we conform to in the world. And at that moment, it seemed like there were two people in the room. There was Pastor, there was me, and God was using him to ask me very specific questions. And he was preaching, and he was saying something to the effect of, do not conform to the world, but have your mind changed. Don't be conformed to the patterns and the things and the ways that you are living this world. Do not be stuck in those ways, but allow God to change your mind so that you can see his perfect will for you. And the questions that started being asked of me were, Rick, you've been conforming to the way you grew up. You've been living by the way that you were taught. You've been loving the way you loved, that you were loved. How is that working for you? You have fathered your children the way you were fathered. You have conformed to the way that you were taught. How's that working for you? You were treating Selena the way you saw your mom be treated. You were treating Selena as the previous relationships were treated on you, the way they treated you. You are conforming to everything in the world. You are doing what the world is telling you. How is that working for you? And no joke, I was sitting there by myself. It was just me. And I could not move. I could not stand up. I could not run to that exit door that I had already planned to run through. I had to sit there and listen. To the garbage that I had created in my life. And I had to, as I sat there, I just cried, and every single one of my children's faces came upon me. But in that moment, in the most broken place of my life, there was a third person that came into that room. And I didn't know who it was until later. It's the truth. But Jesus came into my life that day. And I could feel somebody else's presence next to me. And he said the simplest words. He said, Rick, it's going to be okay now. To be honest, I didn't know what that meant. I really did not know what that meant. It's going to be okay now? Like, how can anything be okay after this? Given everything that I'm going through right now, how is anything going to be okay? But there was just a split second where I believed it. And I was broken even harder. And Jesus was just telling me that I'm here. And it's going to be okay now. Make no mistake, like these tears that I'm crying right now, they have transformed. They truly have. They're different. They're tears. These are tears of joy. Because in a place where I didn't even think that I had a place, in a time in my life where I didn't even want to live, where I had the best thing, the best of the best. I had Selena in my life. I had my children in my life, and I could not see them. I could not feel them. I could not love them. You would have thought that you would have had a great situation. Looking at me from this point of view now, you would have said, man, that's a lot to live for. But I could not see it that way. And it wasn't until I got into a relationship with Jesus from that day on. And let me tell you, that's not when things changed. Not at all. Things did not change that day. They did not change in that moment. I simply understood that God was here and he was going to do something, but I had no idea what. And in that moment, that was enough for me. That was enough hope. It was this much hope he gave me. And that's all it took. That's all it took for him to just say, it's going to be okay now. But when I look back to it and I realized that those words came from him, and he only solely has the power to say the simplest words, just like those, and to have the most impact that it could change your entire life. But again, my life did not change completely right there. I continue to live in some of my old ways. I continue to do things the way I wanted to do them. But there was this slow shift, this slow understanding, and what it was it was like God used this way of confusion to let me hear him. And I'm not sure how to make other sense than that of it, but to say that he had to undo so much in my life. He had to untie so many things that were tied to me. He had to undo so much work that I had already done so that he could perform a new work in my life. Hopefully that makes sense to you. But there was so much that I had to deal with backwards in order to move forward with him. And he was so patient in that. And the fact that it took me 2 years just to really have from that point on, I was broken every day almost. But I was broken in sorrow and in pain and in reflection. And I was broken in all of these ways that I had been living my life, this conformity that I had fallen into. And I had fallen into the biggest ditch, and I didn't ever think that I could get out of it, but God was showing me step by step that I could. And there was this little bit of hope that was just being built up every single time that I came to him. And this process took at least a couple years, to the point where God moved us away to Sierra Vista. I thought it was for my job, but it was actually for us to be amongst a church family that was going to help me see God in a different light, and that they were going to provide an atmosphere and a family-oriented way of understanding what God is in our church and in our lives and in our families. And he was basically going to show me how to love. And through that process, when we came back, he had done a mighty work in us over there, and in me. Things still weren't finished. Like I came back and I had to deal with a lot of this portion of my life where God was opening my eyes to certain things and certain ways that I was living. So I had to deal with them each individually, and it was very difficult. And there were so many times, let me tell you, that I wanted to say, I'm not going to do this anymore. Everybody talks about God, how he's just so great and he's so forgiving and merciful, but why do I feel like crap all the time then? Why am I constantly crying? Why am I constantly broken? If God is supposed to be this great thing, why am I constantly broken in his presence? And I didn't understand it at the moment, but I knew I had to continue with it. I had to stay the course with it. I had to continue searching for him. And he gave me the only strength that I needed, and that was just keep looking at me. That was the only direction that I needed. Just keep looking at me. Just keep looking at me. And as things continue to fall apart, and there was like this building of peace in my life. Like, yes, you've still lost your home. Yes, your relationship is still broken with your family. Yes, your history still shows that you are a piece of garbage and you have no friends left because you've decided to change your life and they all think you're fake now. And so now you're fake to the world. Yes, all of that is still true, but I have peace in that. And I couldn't explain that other than the fact that God's presence brings that. And so moving on, as we came to back to Sahuarita, I felt like we were coming back home. And we were literally coming back home because I grew up in Sarita, but it had never felt like home like it felt like home this time. And God had a place for me. And there's a story in the Bible that I'll share with you. It's probably in a different, one of the YouTubes that I'll do. And it's about the prodigal son. I was reminded of this last night as we were praying. And God had been calling me home for 35 years. And the one thing about that story is that it says the father saw his son from a distance, from afar. And he said that he greeted him with compassion and love. And so, those being two things that I had never truly experienced in its right form, God called me back with those two things, with compassion and love. And the thing I remember is that he never pointed a finger at me. To this day, he's never said, "What were you doing that whole time? What were you thinking that whole time while you were gone?" He's never put judgment or guilt on me. He's never shamed me. He's done things to draw me away from those emotions and those feelings. And he's taken all of that from me and started a new story. And now I'm proud to say that I don't even know that guy anymore. But at the same time, I never want to forget, because that is what God has done with me. To the point where now there is nothing in this world, in this earth, that I cherish more than the family that I could not love. There's nothing more than there's nothing better than to come home and see and feel love. And because of the grace of God and the work that he's done in so many people around me and in my four walls of my home, the way he's changed the heart of each individual that is my family. We love each other properly. We love each other fiercely. And we just pour it out on each other constantly. And I can feel it now. I can feel what it is to be loved and to love properly. And it is something that is, I could never put a price on it. There's nothing that I could do in my own will, and I know this now, to gain that, or to tell somebody this is how you do it, other than the fact to say that I went to Jesus and he said, "Come here, I have something for you." And that thing was a new heart. And like he gave me a new heart. And so my story is that. It's that there's this process of brokenness, of having a broken heart. God took it away from me and gave me a new one. He gave me one that would love my children in a way that I was never loved or shown love. He gave me a heart that would accept it and want to pour it out on those around me. I cannot explain how that happens other than the fact that I allowed God to come into my life. He did not force himself. He simply said, "Hey, son, when you're ready to come home, I'm here waiting." So that is my story. Me and Selena have just started a process where we will begin classes in order with through our church, where God has called both of us to be pastors, and we will do that. We'll fulfill God's calling on our lives. We will continue to search Him for the rest of our lives. I have devoted my entire life to Him. Those who know me or those who know about me, if you know me now, you know that my life is all Him. And there are still things that I struggle with. There are still one of the biggest things that I continue to struggle with is taking more of God to my workplace and to places where I feel like there are places that are restricted. But God is even breaking those barriers. He's even tearing down those walls of my understanding of His power. And so as I continue to seek Him, He's just crushing those things. And He's allowing me to do what He called me to do. And that is speak to His never-ending mercy and His relentlessness to find you. Because after 35 years, when I came home, man, it was the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. And for that, I am truly grateful. I will always be grateful. And in my imperfection that I sit in now, and still some of the things that I deal with now, I know that God is who I will continue to keep my eyes on. And He will always do what He promised to do from the beginning, and He's always going to make it okay for me. That is my story, and I just thank you for listening to it. If it was too long, I apologize, but thank you for listening, and God bless you.